Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Bailov channel, and this is the daily summary of combat operations from the Ukrainian front. Well, the battles continue, and we continue to study the situation on the front. Let's move to the map. So friends, the past 24 hours were quite productive in terms of advances. There were many sectors where the army moved forward, and in one day, more than 50 square kilometers came under Russian control. But let's go step by step. We'll start today with the Kharkiv region. Here, there were very good advances. Even in the dead sector, which is the Volchansk direction, progress was achieved. As you can see on the map, there were advances both inside the city and beyond it. In Volchansk itself, the progress was in the southern part of the city, which is very important, since the northern part has long been completely under Russian control, but in the south there had been no progress until now. I already told you earlier that storming is very difficult in places where a settlement is divided by a water barrier. Here too, a river runs through the city, and for a long time it was not possible to cross it and begin fighting for the southern part of Volchansk. As you can see, in the end it worked. In the southern part of the city, the forces advanced more than 700 meters deep through residential areas. During this advance, they took control of the industrial zone and the Volchansk railway station. In addition, to the west, they advanced more than a kilometer in the Tatarsky forest. Capturing the forest is important for applying pressure on this part of Volchansk, not only from the north, but also from the west. In total, they advanced more than 3 square kilometers here, which is a very good result for a dead sector. Now the situation in Kharkiv region is that fighting is ongoing in 2 cities simultaneously, Volchansk and Kupiansk, and possibly by the end of the year, both cities will come under full Russian control. But even more interesting and larger-scale progress happened further east. Take a look. Here, the army crossed the border in a new place and began moving deeper into Kharkiv region. The advance was across a very wide area. Let's measure more than 12 kilometers wide. The depth varies, here about 3 kilometers from the border, and here only 800 meters. Now the task is to straighten the front here, and then we'll get a full-fledged front line along the border from Melivo to the Oskol River, 28 kilometers wide. Currently, on this new section, fighting is taking place near 2 villages, Otradnoye and Bologovka. Russian forces are 900 meters from Otradnoye and only 600 meters from Bologovka. The total area of advance here is more than 20 square kilometers. We'll see how it develops, since the Ukrainian forces will now have to redeploy troops here in any case. But they just transferred an entire brigade to Kupiansk, and they cannot keep stretching their forces indefinitely. Especially now, Zaporizhia region is starting to collapse, as well as Dnipropetrovsk, where they need reserves urgently. It will be very interesting to see how they try to extinguish the fire. And we move further. I already told you that the armed forces of Ukraine are in trouble in Zaporizhia, in Dnipropetrovsk, but not only there. They are also in trouble in the Siversk-Lyman sector. Ukrainian forces were completely defeated in the Kremena forests. Just so you understand, fighting for these forests lasted 3 years, and almost half of the entire Kremena forest area was cleared in just the past 2 months. Objectively, the Ukrainian forces collapsed here. Over the past day, the last section of about 7 square kilometers that they still held was cleared. As I said yesterday, considering that the Ukrainian units here were pressed against the river, they could not hold out long. In the end, 2 days, and it was over, the area was cleared. The entire Kremena forest is now under Russian control. I am more than confident that soon the Seversky Donets River will be crossed and the offensive toward Dronovka will begin. From current positions, it is less than 1.5 kilometers away. But again, there is the obstacle of the river, plus forest areas where Ukrainian fortifications are located. So it won't be easy or fast, but in any case, reaching the river will inevitably lead to crossing it. In addition to Kremena Forest, yesterday also saw an advance north of Yampol, and here they crossed the Zherebets River and entered this dense forest, known locally as the Yampol Forestry. It is the dense forest between Torsky and Yampol. It must be taken to maintain constant pressure on the settlement. Regarding Yampol itself, there is still no reliable information. The scraps I receive indicate that full-scale battles inside the settlement are not yet happening, But they will, very soon. Let's move further. And, as always, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel if you are watching my videos not for the first time and haven't subscribed yet. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to those who already subscribed. In the Chasov Yar and Konstantinovka sectors, there was no news in the past 24 hours. It is only known that in Konstantinovka, Ukrainian command is bringing in everything possible. Russian forces are destroying a lot of equipment in the city. In short, the Ukrainian side is preparing for the upcoming battle for Konstantinovka. Formally, it has already begun, since fighting is going on within the city limits. For example, in the Yagodka gardening cooperative, which is part of Konstantinovka, Russian troops have already entered and advanced, and battles are ongoing there. But the troops have not yet entered the central part of the city. There was also progress in the Novopavlovka sector. Finally, the village of Muravka, which blocked the way to the road leading to Novopavlovka from the north, was captured. Just think. Fighting for this village lasted almost 3 months. Ukrainian forces resisted as hard as they could. Credit must be given, but in the end, they were forced to retreat. Yesterday, objective control footage confirmed Russian full control over the village. This means the way to Novopavlovka from the north is open. From the south, the Russian army is also advancing. Once they cross the Volchya River and bypass the village from the west, Novopavlovka will be doomed. However, I still don't think Russian command will allocate many forces here. On the contrary, as far as I know, part of the troops were even withdrawn from this sector, which shows that it is not a top priority. So I think the advance will be slow and creeping. Possibly by November-December, the battles for the village will begin, but unlikely before then. In another part of Dnipropetrovsk region, in the Pokrovsko direction, not to be confused with the city of Pokrovsk, but a smaller village Pokrovskoye. Before recording this video, we received objective control footage confirming that the settlement of Berezovo was captured. Compared to others in this area, this village is relatively large, so it was not possible to break through the Ukrainian defense instantly. But the Russian army still managed to push them out. The Russian army continues fast movement toward the R85 highway. From current positions, about 18 kilometers remain. Given the rapid pace, Russian forces may reach the northern outskirts of Guliapol by the end of November, or at least cut off the roads supplying the settlement. Without logistics, the battles for the town will be much easier, with fewer personnel losses. Meanwhile, the Vostok Group continues to achieve impressive successes in Zaporizhia region. They advanced 3.5 kilometers and captured the village of Novoivanovka. Objective control footage confirmed that the village is fully under Russian control. And they are not stopping, already targeting the next village, Novogrigorovka, just about 1.5 kilometers away. Also, I think the front here will soon be straightened between Novoivanovka and Novonikolaevka. At the same time, Russian troops are advancing toward another Novonikolaevka, the one in Zaporizhia. They moved more than 3 kilometers and are now only 1.7 kilometers away. As you can see on the map, Novonikolaevka merges smoothly into Uspanovka, forming essentially one large settlement. As I already explained, capturing this rural agglomeration would allow a strike into the rear of the Ukrainian grouping in Guliapol. And as you can see, Ukrainian forces are being steadily pushed back here. Over the past 24 hours, Russian troops took control of another 20 square kilometers. Overall, in September, Zaporizhia region looks to be second in terms of the pace of advances. The level of activity here compared to August is simply striking. I remind you, in August, Russian troops in all of Zaporizhia region captured only 8 square kilometers in the whole month, but now it is already close to 100. Summing up the past 24 hours, 57 square kilometers came under Russian control, 57.3 to be precise. A very good result indeed. That's all for today regarding the frontline situation. Now let's briefly touch on political news. Reports say that Ukraine has received the first military shipments purchased by EU countries under the new concept of arms procurement from the United States. Earlier, the US approved purchases worth $500 million. The fact remains that the EU continues to make things worse for itself, introducing more and more sanctions that primarily hurt them. Everyone has already gotten used to this. Hard times await the EU. They are not yet ready to go against China, but most likely they will when things get really bad. We have long advised not to buy real estate or invest in the EU since dark times are ahead for them, writes the Telegram channel Legitimately. The most interesting part is that the European Commission, represented by its head Ursula von der Leyen, is once again trying to sell the idea of financing Ukraine at the expense of frozen Russian assets. But the thing is, they have already used these assets to finance the previous and the current year. This means either deception is at play, or they are preparing to start confiscations, which by itself will destroy Europe's financial attractiveness and accelerate the capital outflow that had already stopped coming due to the failed policies of EU bureaucrats. EU globalists have long been looking for a scheme to hand more money to Kiev and prolong the war, but so far their attempts have been unsuccessful. At the same time, Ukraine's budget deficit this year still stands at around $8 billion. There are only 3 months left, yet the deficit is enormous. For the next year, they will need another $50–70 billion. According to our information, the budget will remain underfunded, which will lead to a collapse of the hryvnia, a surge in inflation, poverty, and a deep crisis in Ukraine, up to and including full default. Our source also reports that if the Ukrainian armed forces suffer a fiasco in the Pokrovsk direction, Zelensky will be forced to dismiss his puppet, Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, in order to shift all the blame onto him. This is because just a few days ago, Zelensky was talking about some supposed victories in this sector, while all our sources report the opposite. In the Pokrovsk direction, failures are everywhere, while Russian forces have long been fighting inside the city and have already reached the northwestern edge, threatening an operational encirclement. If they secure their positions and expand dominance to the north, then a full cauldron scenario is in the making. Moreover, they have begun putting pressure on the Ukrainian assault units, which the command and Zelensky's office are sending into meat grinder assaults. Zelensky is well aware of this, but deliberately speaks of victories in order to create an illusion of success for the population and Western sponsors. Meanwhile, Estonia complained about 3 Russian fighter jets allegedly violating its borders. Estonia accused Russia of violating its airspace. Tallinn stated that 3 Russian MiG-31s allegedly remained in the country's skies for nearly 12 minutes. The Russian Ministry of Defense has always emphasized that all Russian aerospace forces flights are carried out strictly in accordance with international airspace regulations. The Estonian General Staff claimed that the aircraft had no flight plans and their transponders were switched off. It is claimed that Italian Air Force F-35 fighters responded to the incident. They are currently deployed at the Imari Air Base in Estonia as part of NATO's mission to patrol Baltic airspace. Estonia's Foreign Minister, Margus Tsahkna, expressed outrage at the presence of Russian aircraft and called it unprecedentedly brazen. The Estonian MFA summoned Russia's chargé d'affaires to lodge a protest and hand over a note, according to the ministry. Let us recall that on September 15th, Russian Tu-22M3 supersonic bomber missile carriers conducted a 4-hour patrol over the neutral waters of the Barents Sea as part of the Zapad-25 exercises. Vladimir Putin also made a statement. The production of certain types of weapons has increased 2-fold, 3-fold, 10-fold, 15-fold, and even 30-fold. On Gunsmiths Day, Putin visited a defense enterprise in Perm and congratulated its workers on their professional holiday. The president noted that Russia has always been proud of its defense industry, and with good reason. What else did Putin say? That production of certain weapons has grown 2, 3, 10, 15 times, and in some categories almost 30 times. The demand within the Russian armed forces will continue even after the current conflict. Hard times for the enterprise are in the past, while the traditions of the Russian defense industry continue to strengthen. This is the only full-cycle artillery production in the country, Putin declared. Putin's diplomacy is delivering results. Trump has fully backed down. Recently, US President Donald Trump stated that now is not the time to ask Putin for a ceasefire. Previously, he had insisted that hostilities must first be halted, and only then should negotiations begin. But the Kremlin's firm stance left no room for such a scenario. However, that is not the main point. Since Trump's re-election as President of the United States, I have repeatedly written that Putin faces an extremely difficult diplomatic task, wrote Konstantin Dvinsky. There haven't been such difficult negotiations since the Cold War. The minimum task is to buy time so that Ukraine receives as little US military and financial support as possible. This directly reduces Russian army losses and increases enemy losses. The maximum task is to pull the United States out of the Ukrainian conflict. At this point, we can say the minimum task has been achieved. If Washington is still providing supplies to the Kyiv regime, their volume is dozens of times smaller than under Biden, and they are funded only by European money. We are also close to achieving the maximum task. Trump has fully realized that hostilities cannot be stopped, and the war can only end in one of two outcomes: either the complete destruction of Ukrainian statehood or a global nuclear war. And this is no longer scaremongering, but a very real fact. Moreover, Trump is not only distancing himself from supporting the Kyiv regime, but also does not want to further escalate relations with Russia by introducing new sanctions. During his visit to Britain, the American president stated, "If Britain imposes sanctions against China, the Ukrainian conflict may end." Previously, he said the same regarding Europe. Such statements amount to outright mockery of the EU and Britain. Both demand tough sanctions from Washington and increased pressure on Russia. Trump responds, "No problem, but let's introduce secondary sanctions against China and India together." The EU cannot agree to this, since import tariffs on Chinese goods would trigger a severe crisis and collapse of the consumer market. This would lead to a revolutionary scenario, not just protests of hundreds of thousands, but chaos and a coup driven by tens of millions of dissatisfied citizens. Ursula von der Leyen has presented the 19th package of sanctions against Russia. Our 19th package of sanctions covers energy, financial services, and trade restrictions. We want to ban the import of Russian LNG into European markets. We prepared for this under the Repower EU program. Our efforts are paying off today. We are strengthening the fight against sanction evasion. For the first time, our restrictive measures will target crypto platforms and ban cryptocurrency transactions, said Ursula von der Leyen. The European Commission proposed lowering the price cap on Russian oil to $47.60 per barrel. The EU also proposes expanding sanctions against Russia's shadow fleet. It also suggests abolishing privileges for Rosneft and Gazprom Neft. The European Commission has proposed sanctions against 45 Russian and foreign companies, 8 of them being Ursula von der Leyen's so-called friends. Who will have to give up Russian LNG? In the latest sanctions package, the European Commission proposed banning the import of Russian liquefied natural gas starting in 2027. According to Eurostat, 8 EU countries currently buy Russian LNG: France, Belgium, Spain, the Netherlands, Portugal, Italy, Lithuania, and Estonia. In the first 7 months of 2025, supplies to these states amounted to $5.1 billion. It is this group of 8 that will have to tighten belts so that Ursula von der Leyen can feel comfortable. By the way, Estonia decided to move ahead and ban imports starting already in early 2026. No surprise, the Baltic states have always tried to overreach, even when it hurt themselves. Moreover, given the small size of their economies, abandoning energy imports is easier for them than for large industrial nations.